Welcome to our fifth and last video of our Stripe week, a whole week dedicated to integrating Stripe with Backfrap. Today is finally the day where we're going to get everything that we learned so far and put together in Backfrap's Cloud Code. So here I have my Backfrap dashboard for the Stripe integration app that I created, and it's basically an empty app. All that I did in here was to create a product class with two properties, a description as a string and price as a number, and I added a few records in here, and these are the items that we are going to add to our Stripe invoice. So now let's produce some cloud code. The first thing I want to show you today is how to create a Stripe customer at the same time that you create a new Backfrap user. So to do that, we're going to go to our Cloud Code section, Functions and Web Hosting, and open up the main.js file. And in here, we're going to instantiate our Stripe SDK with the secret key that was provided. So as the Stripe SDK is built in the Backfrap stack, you don't have to download or install anything. You can just use the SDK. So we'll do that by requiring the Stripe SDK and passing in the secret key as we learned in the previous videos. Now it's time for us to create a before save trigger for the user class. This piece of code will be executed every time I try to create a new user in Backfrap, and it will automatically create a new customer in the Stripe platform. But I want to add some information in my user class so you can see how customizable this is. So I'll just deploy this code really quickly. This takes a couple of seconds. And now I'll go back to my database browser and to the user class. And this is the default user class for Backfrap, so it has all the information that any user class must have. But I want to add a few properties in here. So all I have to do is to click this plus column button. I'll add a string and call it full name. This is the property where I'm going to add my full name so it can show it in Stripe. So add a column and continue. I'll also add a string called description, so I can add some information about myself. Add and continue. Last but not least, I want to be able to save in Backfrap the Stripe customer ID when I create the customer in Stripe. So I'll also create another string called Stripe ID. Add column. And here are my three properties: full name, description, and Stripe ID. Back to my Cloud Code section, inside my main.js file, we're going to start writing our before save trigger. We'll do that by typing parse.cloud.before save, and this takes a class name as an first argument. But the user class is a reserved name, so instead of using the user string, I'll be using parse.user. And then we're going to get the async request for this and arrow function it to our code. The first thing I have to do is to capture the information from the request inside Backfrap so I can retrieve the email of the user, the full name, and the description so I can pass it on to Stripe. We do that by typing const my email equals request.object.get. Get is how we read properties in Backfrap, and then the property name, email. And the email property is built in the user class automatically. Now let's get the other properties that I just set. So const my name equals request.object.get and full name. And let's do the same for the description. So const my desk equals request.object.get description. Hopefully I didn't misspell anything. And now I'll create in here a try-catch block because I want this code to fully execute or not execute at all. So try and catch exception. If it runs into the catch block, all I want to do is to return the exception. And in here in the try block, we're going to try to create the Stripe customer, and if it succeeds, set the Stripe ID in Backfrap. So let's start by typing let response equals I'll wait because this is an asynchronous call. Stripe.customers.create. And this will take a JSON object with the parameters that we learned in the first video. So let's pass in the email, which will be my email that I'm retrieving from here. I will also add the name of the customer, that is my name. And finally, the description. That will be my desk. Now, if this piece of code runs, I will have a response that has an ID property. And now it's time for us to set into our user in Backfrap the Stripe ID. We'll do that by typing request, which is my requested object, prior to saving to the database, dot object, dot set is how you set properties, Stripe ID, and then we're going to get the response dot ID as its value. Now click deploy. Once again, this takes a couple of seconds, and if everything is right, I should be able to open the database browser in a new tab so we can see it working together. If I go to the user class and try to add a new row, it will ask me for some mandatory data such as the username, which will be Alex K, the password, which will be abc123, the email, which will be alexk@backforapp.com, the full name, which will be Alex K, a description, back for app architect. In the Stripe ID, I will leave empty so it can be populated by the response. So when I click add, you can see it automatically created my Stripe customer and retrieved its ID and save it to Backfrap. So if I just go to my Stripe dashboard and go to customers, you see in here I have Alex K, which is alexk@backfrap.com, and if I open this up, you probably see somewhere here Backfrap Architect, which is my description. So this is how you automatically create a Stripe customer using a Backfrap trigger for the user class. Now let's try to retrieve this user, and once we get it, we can try to generate an invoice for the user. So back to our Cloud Code section, our main.js file. I'm going to code it as a Cloud Code function so I can execute it, but you could use a Cloud job, any trigger that you want. The strategies may vary on what you're trying to achieve, but this is a very easy way for you to see what is going on. So we start a Cloud Code function by typing parse.cloud.define, and the first parameter will be the function name. I'm going to call this purchase. The second parameter will be the async request that we're going to arrow function to our code. And once in here, once again, I want to retrieve some information prior to trying to create that invoice. So the first thing I will need is to retrieve the user that made the request so I can get its Stripe ID and pass it on to Stripe. We'll do that by typing let Stripe user ID equals request dot user dot get, and then my property, which is Stripe ID. Now I have all the information on my side that I need to send to Stripe, because all the other information that I might need, I'll be running into a query. So once again, I'm going to do a try-catch block because I want this to run completely or not to run at all. So catch exception. And if something goes wrong, all I want to do is to return the exception so I can see what went wrong. And once in here, I want to create the invoice for the user so I can start appending lines or items to it. We do that by typing const invoice equals await, because this is once again an asynchronous call, stripe.invoices.create, and this once again takes a JSON object, and the JSON object has the customer, which is the Stripe user ID that I retrieved from the request that Backfrap made. So if this runs successfully, I should have an invoice object which has an ID that we'll be using in the future. But now I want to run a query on my product class, which is here, to retrieve all these descriptions and prices and add those as items into my invoice. So we'll start by writing a new query in here. So const query equals new parse.query, and then pass in the class name that I'm trying to run my query on, so product. And then we can try to query, because I don't want to use any constraints. I just want to retrieve all the objects. If you need to set constraints, you can do it as well. So const results equals await query dot find. Oops. Now this should retrieve all the objects from inside my product class, and then I can loop through those results. And there are many ways to do that. I usually don't use the for loop, but today we're going to use the for loop for that. So for let e equals 0, I minor than requests dot length I plus plus. This will run through all the array results, and in here we're going to create invoice items and add those to our invoice that we just created. We'll do that by typing let invoice item equals await, and actually perhaps you don't want to add too many items as this, because every single loop iteration will call an asynchronous call, and this can translate into a slow performing app. So ideally you should try to avoid this kind of situation by trying to group together, constructing the whole array at once and save it at just one call. But today we're going to do it like this because it's easier to see what's happening. So await stripe dot invoice items dot create, and this once again has a JSON object as a parameter, and we're going to add some information in here. So the first one is the customer. The customer is my Stripe user ID that I retrieved from the request in Backfrap. The second parameter is the amount. The amount is the price in a per item that I want to set. So amount results, which is my array, index I, which is the object that I'm iterating at this moment, dot get, and then price. Oops, come on. Then we have to set a currency for this item, and you must ensure you're using the same currency that you're using for the user. So for instance, I created this user and it identified myself as using Brazilian reais, which is the currency that I use here in my country. But if I try to add US dollar items in my invoice, it won't work. So I have to set the same currency that my user is using. So let's try BRL in here. So currency BRL. Also, we're going to add a description. So description will be the name of the item that I'm iterating through. So results index I dot get description. And finally, I'm going to add a invoice ID, so it knows to which invoice it needs to save this item to. So invoice, and then in the invoice ID. Remember, we got the invoice ID when we first created, so all I have to do is here is put invoice.id. And finally, after this for loop has looped through, I can return the string done, so I know it finished my cloud code. Once again, I'll click deploy. Hopefully I didn't misspell anything. There we go. And now I'm going to open a new tab, my API tab, so I can call this cloud code function. So I have to go to console, and the REST API console, change the type of request to post, type the endpoint, which will be functions, /n, my function name, which was purchase. If I'm not wrong, there you go, I'm going to copy it from here, paste it in there. Then I have to run it as a user, which will be impersonating the user that will do this call. So in here, I'm going to go to the user class, get the object ID from this user that I just created, paste it in here, and if everything is alright, this should run fine. Invalid function purchase. Perhaps I did something wrong. Let's check the logs. Perhaps I can see something in the logs. It seems I used a not a comma when I try to use the Stripe user ID in line 26. So let's go back there and check it, line 26. There you go. This can break up your cloud code, and it won't allow you to save the function because it will break the interpreter. So deploy once again. Now if you try to run this once again, I just got an empty result, which means it probably didn't work. So let's understand why. Let's check the logs once again. Let's see if it created the invoice for me. So let's go to the payments, invoices. And it actually did, but it didn't add any items to it. So it seems I have some problem inside my portion of the code that is adding the items to the invoice. So let's go back there and try to fix it. Let me delete this draft. Go back to our cloud code and try to understand what's happening. So one very good way to do this is to try to return strings that will show debug information on what you're trying to do. So, I see the problem already. I use the requests.length, and it should be the results.length in here. Oops. Now, if I deploy this once again, it should probably run. Okay, let's try to do it once again. Done. It should be working now. So back to my invoices. If I refresh the screen, there you go. The invoice was created, and as you can see here, all the items are listed individually with its prices, as actually you can see it in here, and a summarized value at the very end. So this is how you create an invoice in Cloud Code. If you want to pay this invoice, all you have to do is to call the pay method and provide the payment information as needed. So if you like this series, please click the like button and consider subscribing to the channel so you can help us grow. Also share this link with a friend and they can learn something too. If you already subscribed, thank you for that. And if you have any questions, suggestions, or any implementation you'd like to see, please leave it on the comment section below. We'll always answer all the questions. I hope you liked this series and hope to see you back in the channel soon, as we will have more series like this on next week. See you soon. Bye bye.